Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another on-location edition of Mic'd Up Sports. And my guest today has been to plenty of locations throughout her lifetime in sports, in the community. She's done a little bit of everything. You may have seen her on a community service event for Onika's Angels. You might be seeing her in the classroom helping the next generation of young leaders, and you might have spotted her at Lynx games, usually sits courtside and has appeared in a few photos. Or you might remember her from her time as a basketball player at Washburn, Rainy River, and then Minnesota Morris. Onika Craven, our guest today. Onika, thanks for stopping by. And I know this is coming on the heels of your Hall of Fame induction at Rainy River, which, from what I saw, was a prestigious honor for you and perhaps one of the most gratifying to get that kind of recognition. So again, thanks for taking the time. And what does it mean to have Hall of Famer next to your name at Rainy River?
No, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so this was just last weekend. You know, when you think about Hall of Fame, you normally think about sports, but for mine, it was professional excellence, which means everything that I did outside of Rainy River, the acting, the modeling, the writing, the photography, started in Onika's Angels. And so all those other things and accolades that I've done over the last 30 years was the reason for that award. Just to be able to joke with my friends and like, my name is Onika Nicole Craven, HOF 23, right? But it's up there with Lindsay Whaling and all these other great athletes and stuff. But so when you say Hall of Fame, people really don't, they just think sports. And so it's always awesome to be able to explain that it was for something else. At some point, our basketball team as a whole, because I played with Daphne Walker from the Great North teams, we will probably go in as well, but as a team.
Onika, you brought up an interesting point on Hall of Fames because another friend of ours, Dana Gilbert, just got inducted into the American Basketball Hall of Fame. But you're right, anytime you hear the words Hall of Famer, it usually is in the context of sports. And you certainly played sports at Rainy River, basketball specifically, because we know you would finish your college career at Morris. But what was the reaction? What did you learn when people found out about this and then they realized, oh, this wasn't just for your time as an athlete, but for all of the other community engagements that you've done since your playing days ended?
I mean, their first reaction was, okay, you're a decent player at Rainy River. I'll just be honest. I mean, I would be more like in high school.
You would take me to school now, even at I haven't. You should see me play pickup. It does not end well for me usually.
I'm old, so right now it's just trying to see where I would go. But when I was younger, in my younger days, people would probably assume that it would probably be for basketball. But I was in my later days because there was no WNBA when I graduated. So for me, the drive that I had when I was younger to play all the time was gone because I didn't have the wit or the idea that I wanted to go play overseas. And so I kind of lost a little bit, but my natural ability of my speed and being able to jump and defend players is where I made my bread and butter. So it gave me an opportunity to do something else. And so when they say Hall of Fame, my teammates was like, oh, we're getting in as a team because we were pretty successful at Rainy. And then I'm like, no, it's because of my professional excellence after I left. And then they start listening to all the things that I've done, and you just watch it with social media, but like, now I can see why you would be inducted.
And I would not dispute the reasoning behind your induction, and no matter how it comes, it's a distinguished honor. But the genesis, I guess, did begin when you were taking up basketball. Like you said, there was no WNBA. If I recall, you graduated from Washburn in 1990?
In 1990, yep. So I did 2 years at Henry, then we moved over south, and so then I finished my next 2 years at Washburn.
So what kind of opportunities were around in your time as a player? Because I've interviewed a lot of modern day athletes, and they can watch highlights of Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers, and a lot of fellow Minnesota players, for example. You probably have heard of them with your experience covering the Gophers and the Lynx. But when you were growing up, how did females like yourself, women like yourself, what avenues did they have to channel their passion for sports?
We'd always have to follow the men, right? So if I do a Clyde Turner basketball camp and I'll ask the kids, who wants to play in the league, all the men and the boys would raise their hand. Or if you ask the girls who they emulate, they would say the men players. Even for myself, it was Magic Johnson. I would do a pass like him and they're like, oh, you remind me of Magic. But we didn't really, like I said, we didn't have a WNBA. And then after a while, you started getting some of the great players that once they played overseas and been able to come back here to the United States. And so now you have all these players so everybody wants to be a Clark. They want to be the girl from LSU. They want to be all these different
Angel
players.
Reese.
Yeah, they want to be all these players. And we just didn't have it. I mean, I think my senior year, Lisa Leslie had scored 101 points in high school, right?
And Cheryl Miller was kind of, I'd say, the big name in women's hoops at the time.
And that was pretty much it. And she was have to play with the boys, or the men, right? I got a chance to interview Cheryl Miller when they had a Lynx thing a couple years ago, and to be able to to see this woman who put, she's one of the greats that we have in our time, but we didn't have a lot as much as now the access that the WNBA are giving our girls. Clark is she's always been a Minnesota Lynx fan. We didn't have that, right? And we didn't have the Timberwolves until later, so we would always have to go out and get NBA teams outside. So I was always a Laker fan and hated the Boston Celtics.
89 is when the Wolves came here, or when the Wolves formed. So yeah, most of your high school career,
it was over. Yes.
There was no local team to root for. So I have to imagine, because you and I have a lot of mutual contacts because of our shared journey in basketball. Well, you are a more accomplished athlete. I would have been lucky to dribble the ball across half court. That's the extent of my athleticism. But I thought of a Crystal Flynn who comes, you probably know who she is. Big Boston fan, so I hope the two of you didn't have any hard feelings about your fandom if you grew up cheering for the Lakers and when she came over here, being a big. Well, she's more of a. I remember now. She was more of a fan of players. She'll root for Boston,
right,
but she didn't gravitate to one team specifically. But I'm like, what happens when you meet up with any Boston fans? Does it get awkward?
It does, because that's funny because I just sent a friend of mine. His name is Chris, so he married a player that I went to school with at Morris. Her name is Kayleen Rogers. It was Deutsch back in my playing days, and he's from the Boston area. And so there's a picture with the Kobe Lakers in 2009. Is that when Boston won it?
2008 is when Boston won it, and then 2010 is when the Lakers beat them Boston.
Yep. So there's a picture of the players. And I said, this is the only picture that I've ever seen where, depending on what year it is, I either love it or hate it, right? And we go at it all the time, when we look at football, when the Vikings play the Patriots, we always go back and forth, but it's a mutual love. And my friend Kayleen is right in the middle of it because she grew up here in Minnesota, but she can't help. I mean, Boston wins everything. And so you can't really be like, well, we got Minnesota Lynx. So there's not a lot to stand on, right? So I can't really
you know
say
what though, there's nothing you and I can do about that.
Right.
Working in media, and I know you've interviewed you and I both have interviewed players, and I've befriended a few former athletes through my work at the high school level, and you learn real quick, nothing you say or do is going to change what happens. So for me, it helps me enjoy it more because, of course, if our teams ever go far. So if the Wolves do win an NBA Finals Sunday, or the Vikings win the Super Bowl, you bet I'll be cheering them on. But if that doesn't happen, it's like, oh well.
Right. I think we get used to, because some of our greatest players that have played here for a long time, they go somewhere else, and then you find yourself rooting for the player, not necessarily the team. And Poison, when we talk about Kevin Garnett, he went to the Boston Celtics, and I was like, I would never root for them. But at that moment, I realized that he gave Minnesota 10 years of some of his best. And so when they won the first one, I had nothing but accolades for him, and just like, way to go, Kevin. Or even with Randy Moss when he went to Boston, right? When they were on that 16-0 run, I wanted him to win for him because we weren't able to do it here. But then once they left, I can't cheer for you anymore.
Well, and in my experience covering high school ball, I don't know how closely you follow it with all the work you're doing, but you probably have heard about some of the big names to keep an eye on, the players that might make an impact down the road. And one of them is Madden Greenway, who is the eldest daughter of Chad Greenway with the Vikings. And I've gotten to know their family. And they said when he was playing for the Vikings and his wife would root for him at games, she said, yeah, of course I would love it if they won, but it didn't ruin our day if they lost. It is kind of interesting to examine the parasocial relationship we have with players, and you and I were talking just a little bit before we started taping, and you're seeing that play out with the Lynx and folks having to remind themselves that, okay, this isn't the team we were used to seeing dominate. It could take a little while, and I think some folks don't understand how long that process can take to get yourself back in contention.
Right. I mean, you got to think about it. When we had Katie Smith, when she was here, she was an excellent player, but she didn't have the talent around her. And so they had to go through those rough times to be able to get the Maya Moores, to get Rebecca Brunson to come here, right? And all these, you had Simone Augustus, and then we got Lindsay, and the pieces started coming together, and it took us a while, but we got so used to that group that, we just retired Sylvia's Fowles, and Maya's will go up there in the next year or so. So it's going to take them a while, and I think yesterday was having Diamond back and watching that game and how they played. I'm like, there is some spark there, and we just have to give it time to develop, because it's going to take us a while to get to that. They have to be able to develop who they are and identify with their own, and a lot of times we compare them to the old teams, and we just got to let them be like, this is our team now, this is the 2023 team, and they may not do very well this year, but they, after a draft here or there, in the next couple of years, they could be up there. They have enough talent to do it, and I think a lot of younger players as well.
And who knows, you just might find yourself published in a few more courtside photos.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of your favorites is with Aerial Powers, and I know an old friend of mine years ago, I'll never forget this, you shot me a message going, how did you find this? Or where did you get this when you were dancing with the mascot, Prowl? That
was our guy, Tony Gear, had set that up, and he had the kids line up in a tunnel, and they're like, when Onika comes out, y'all start cheering.
I remember.
Yeah,
that happened. But a few years later, Abe, that was one of Tony's buddies.
Yeah.
He's the one who got the photo of you dancing with Prowl.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah.
You're like,
there's so many. Well, the one with Ariel, this happened last year. It was during one of the games, and it was the end of the third quarter, and I was on courtside, and I yelled, Ariel, if you make this last second shot, I get your shoes. So they went through the play. She got a rebound or stole the ball, and it went in and it popped out, and she was like, ah. And I think at some point you're going to show them the picture so they know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. So she goes, ah, and she walks off the court, and there's an interaction between the two of us. And at that moment, Star Tribune, an independent photographer, people in the stands, took that picture, and it went all over. And so it was in the Star Tribune the next day, and then at the end of the year, it was the photo of the year for the Minnesota Lynx that whole season. And so yesterday, I actually had an opportunity to give her the picture from the paper because she hadn't seen it. But she told me when I was covering boxing on Sunday that that's her favorite picture because I had sent it to her. So that made me feel pretty good.
What would happen if I never showed that picture?
Yeah, I know, right?
Because you're saying I'm going to show it. I'm like, well, I could, but maybe I won't. Leave people guess. Leave it to their imagination.
No, you got to see it.
You can find it. It's on Onika's Facebook page, I think.
Yeah, Onika Nicole Craven.
Okay, well, I guess we got in a plug for her social media. So any clients out there, anyone who wants to call her up for an Onika's Angels event or everything else, I've lost track of all the things you're doing.
Well, I think I should. So when people, because I have my shirt on, talk a little bit about Onika's Angels. So we started in 2020 after George Floyd was killed. And I personally went down to Lake Street on that Friday, and buildings were still on fire. They had the National Guards posted up by the 3rd or 4th Street precinct, but the other areas by YMCA or YWCA was unoccupied by anybody. And there was an outside mall that was on fire, and it was smoking for 45 minutes. People were coming around, and no police officers, no anything. And I'm watching these stores little by little burn up. And in my mind, I've thought about the LA riots and the Baltimore riots that they had. And I was like, I felt bad for those people, but I didn't know that city. But to actually see it for myself, and I realized if all these places are destroyed because of or the fires or the looting, where are the people in that community supposed to get the things that they need? And so I came home and I was billowing of smoke. And I was actually here at my friend's house, and I said, I need to do something. And I said, I'm going to use some of my money because it was still during COVID. So in all the schools, all the employees continue to get paid. Like they still paid us even though we couldn't go to school. And I said there was nowhere to go. So I had this money, and I was like, I will take my own personal finances, go to the Target in St. Louis Park and buy essentials and find places and families to drop stuff off. And that's kind of how it started. And it just morphed from there. The last 2 years, we did scholarships for kids in Minneapolis to further their education. We do Thanksgiving dinners and Easter baskets and Christmas gifts for around the people here in the cities. And so we also do financial support for individuals that may need money for immediate relief, right? So people can donate to us, and then we make sure that 90% of the money that we receive go back out. The other 10% is operational for our lawyers, for our CPAs, and to just get merchandise for shirts so that we can get it out. But 90% of the money that we spend goes back into the community.
That was a wonderful synopsis. I've noticed this podcast is perhaps the most jumbled in terms of chronological traveling that we've done, but I know you did a lot of work through this, and I look forward to the work you continue to do. And I had another guest on recently who started a nonprofit. She put it on hiatus because she's working on her master's degree, I think in nursing at St. Catherine, but she did the same thing following George Floyd. And like you said, the riots and all of the destruction got a lot of coverage, but who it hurt the most are the people that live here that clearly had no plans on creating mayhem. They were just trying to sort and figure things out like I was, like everyone else was. So I suppose that's one way to kill time because, like you said, during the pandemic, schools were shut down, and so everyone had to stay home. And it's wonderful to see it morph into this larger community service project that is now going beyond what you started with, if you get what I'm saying.
Right, yeah. So it was just the essentials, and then we ended up getting we were doing a donation drive, and a woman from Hennepin County saw us and said, what are you guys doing? And we're like, oh, we're doing a donation drive for essentials to give to some of the people in the community. And she said, do you ever think about food insecurities? And I was like, at the time, I really didn't know what that word meant, right? I've always been in a family where my mom and my stepdad took care of me, so there was always food on the table. So what does that look like to the individual? And they're like, there's a care grant that the government has given out to individuals like yourself. And the first year they gave us $20,000. The next year they gave us $30,000. So it was all on food, and we could give it to individuals or other community centers throughout Minneapolis. And so it's an opportunity for, unfortunately, what happened is that was a wonderful opportunity for us, but all those organizations that started and people that was helping, they kind of faded away. But the people that needed the support the most, they're still there. So for me, even though the 5 or 6 people that I have with Onika's Angels, we all have full-time jobs, but we know at the end of the day, we still have to find time to help the people in our community.
Well, again, thanks for explaining that. And I know that's something you're really proud of. I've seen your posts about it. Whenever you get a chance to do an Onika's Angels project, it really gives you a sense of purpose, or an additional sense of purpose with all the other activities you do. If you don't mind, I want to go back to your time as an athlete, not because I'm not interested in what you're saying, but sure. You were talking about having to go elsewhere to find role models because, again, the Wolves weren't a team yet when you started playing high school. You mentioned Magic Johnson was one of your idols. Was he the player you looked up to the most, or were there others? Because you reminded me that, yeah, you grew up in the 80s when it was Lakers, Celtics.
Houston.
Philadelphia won in '83 with Julius Erving, and Detroit, they came in at the end of the decade, the Bad Boys. So
Chicago won in the 90.
91.
Yep.
But Michael Jordan was becoming a big name. I watched The Last Dance and got a glimpse of that stardom he had from the mid '80s on. But
no, it was with Magic.
It was all magic. Okay.
It was always Magic, because you looked at some of the other teams and it was just that that group of men that they had. It was just different than what you were seeing from the other teams. And for Magic to be a point guard, post player, and do everything, to me that was exciting. And I loved that fast pace of the game. And so, like I said, when I would do a pass and somebody was like, "Man, you remind me of a female Magic," that would just blow my head. And I don't know if you knew this, but when they came in 2016, for when the Lynx played them in their first
Lynx Sparks, the first of the two meetings.
Yeah. I was doing media at the time, and it's a no-no to get involved with other players or ask for autographs or pictures, but this was a man that I had idolized since I was 13 years old, right? And so at halftime, I ran over and I saw the guy you mentioned earlier, Abe, and I'm like, "Abe, if Magic comes over here, can you take a picture of us?" And then Magic came and I said, "Can I take a picture?" He's like, "Yeah." And then I was like, I need to talk to him and let him know how much he meant for me as a player. And I went under the tunnel and I was like, "Magic, just one more." And he's like, "Yeah, what can I do?" And I said, "I've been a fan of yours since I was 13. Thank you so much for what you've done to the game and what you've done outside of it, with your movie theaters and Starbucks and giving back to the community to let people know that there's money in our community if people invest in it," right? Mm-hmm. And he gave me a hug, and I don't remember the rest of the game. I know we lost, but it was the best day of my life. I was like, "Why are you smiling?" I'm like, "I'm at Magic."
No, well, and I get what you're saying, and I was always cautious about that. Still am. It's like respect the credential, right. But Magic, I know, really had more of an ancillary role with the Sparks, so not directly involved. And like you said, it wasn't just what he did in basketball, but what he did outside of it. And even when he was playing, I don't remember this personally because I was a little young, but he would spend his off time meeting with executives and trying to figure out, okay, how do I channel this? How do I channel a post-playing career at some point?
Right.
So,
and that, for me, I didn't know that would be instrumental to me because at that moment, I wasn't even thinking about Onika's Angels.
Well, that was 2016.
Right, right.
That was long before George Floyd. So I don't think anyone could have gone into a time machine, or if you'd said, "Oh, by the way, this is going to happen.
Right.
We're going to have a pandemic, and then we're going to be at the center of world news coverage."
But I think what I'm getting at is hearing him talk about the community and being able to help other people in the community. It's planted a seed in me, not knowing that's what I would be doing 4 years later, right? To be able to say, regardless of what I do on the court, if I don't make an impact outside of that, then what am I doing? And especially as an African American man, to be able to show that I have confidence in my community. I could live and do anything I want, live outside, but all his efforts are inside the city. And so that planted a seed in me later, like, this is something I can do. My ideal is to bring more businesses inside Minneapolis, especially North Side, because you look around, there's not a lot of African American businesses, right? You have different people of different colors, Somalis and Latinos. They all have businesses over there, but we have to do more for our community to let us know so that we can have generational wealth and keep that money inside the family and move forward. And so that's what I'm trying to do as well.
You know what, Onika? Once I get this published, I'll tag Magic and see if he responds. Because I'm sure he would appreciate hearing that if you were to meet him again. And again, Magic Johnson, it's hard to go against him because he and Larry Bird, that was the dominant era of the 80s. Right. He and Larry represented that Lakers-Celtics rivalry, so of course it was hard not to hear about them. Do you recall the first moment or memory that got you hooked on the sport of basketball?
I think just because over north there were so many community centers like Hospitality House, you had the Way, the Jerry Gamble's Boys and Girls Club, and there's parks all over. So as a kid, it didn't really matter where you lived. There was a basketball court inside or out, right? And so always seeing, at that time, it wasn't a lot of games. There wasn't a lot of activities for us to do. So playing basketball or playing a sport was just easy to do. You just go outside, because a lot of time, that's all we did. Like, go outside and play, and you would find different things. And I would watch the players and the guys playing. And once I watched it enough, somebody, I think, just invited me, like, hey, I need another player. You want to play? And I fell in love with the game, like loving basketball immediately. And there would be times when I would just go to the court and didn't matter. But I would always, as soon as I got to the court, they'd be like, oh, we're going to pick that girl up. And what was so funny is because they didn't have a lot of female that we could look up to, they're like, oh, it's a girl. And then when I, shoot them up for 15 or 20 in a game of 30, you know what I mean? Like, just hitting them up like that. They were like, oh, she's pretty good. And I kind of got my own reputation. So for me, my first team that I got on was at Northeast Middle School. And they put the name on a piece of paper of the kids who made the team. And I remember running to the payphone. That's how long ago it was.
I think you just dated yourself, Onika, but there are probably lots of fellow members from your generation.
Like, resonate. Like, I remember and I called home, and I was just so excited. And I was crying, and my mom was like, what happened? And I go, no, I made the team, and after that, just being able to watch Magic, watch those tapes over, even though back then, though, I don't know if you remember, all the games were delayed. It wasn't
from the early 80s. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't until the Celtics-Lakers rivalry became
and people were like, we need to
time,
see this, right? So
where they went back to live, because that's right. There was a period where it was tape delayed because the NBA basketball wasn't seen as a sport people wanted to watch. How crazy is that to think? Could you imagine if someone tried doing that now?
Oh, mayhem. It would be crazy. But I mean, now you have social media. People are, on their YouTube channels. You have the streaming. You can watch a game on Hulu right now, right? You can do it on all the channels. So to be able to connect with, and I think social media, it can be good or bad. But I think for the players now, they are their own, with the NIL, they're their own agent, right? They're the ones that are using their platform to be able to give their voices to the people around. I mean, there are players who have 1 million followers. I couldn't even imagine, like, a 17-year-old with 1 million followers. Like, what?
Yeah, I know Paige has 1 million on Instagram, Caitlin Clark. And I thought having 13,000 YouTube subscribers was a big deal. I threw that number out there once, and a couple players were like, what the?
Yeah, that's just family alone, you know what I mean? Yeah, like, it's crazy. That's crazy.
I know, well, and I look at those, and sometimes it's like, yeah, I've got 13,000, but look how many they have. I'm like, I'm not. Absolutely. I still have a long way to go.
But I think with Clark having that social presence and being able to watch her game, you got men involved in watching this last,
Angel Reese, I know her following shot up after
absolutely, because that's good, because it gives they like women. No one watches women's sports, and you're like, but they are, right? Giving them an opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
And so now men were on broadcast on ESPN talking about that battle, that whole tournament, and to watching these players become who they are. And I'm excited for Clark to come out next year and see where she goes. Hopefully, I don't want the links to be really bad, but hopefully we can get her.
Well, that's where I know we were talking about that. If they take a step back, or if they miss, it's one of those years where if you don't make the playoffs, it may not be the worst thing, the worst time for that to happen, because they looked at all of the players who could be eligible. Some, I think, still have that bonus year if they want to use it, but all the players that could be up for grabs. I was going to ask you, though, Onika, how many followers do you think you would have accumulated had Instagram and Facebook, had they been around? So if you didn't have to resort to payphones to let your mom know you made the team, if you could put it out there,
I would be honest.
I'd like to think you'd have 500,000 at least.
I honestly don't know, because I'm not. I mean, I do the stuff for Onika's Angels because I have to. That's how we get our information out. But that just wasn't me. These kids are out there showing everything and telling everything, and I'm kind of a private person. I put it out there because it's a business for me. But I mean, right now I think I only got like 7 people following me on like Twitter. I don't even know. Like, that's not my deal. You know what I mean? But I think for me, I like, if you ask me how many friends I have at least 200 people that I can call right now, from general managers to local people. And that's how I get my information out. And that's just who I am. Maybe because I'm older, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a part of this generation that, the TikTok and all this stuff. But for me, I like that personal relationship. I mean, we met, 2008, 9, and, or whenever, and we still are.
You still call me up from time to time.
Absolutely. So I love
to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
Onika Ramsey.
Yeah.
When we had near mayhem erupt.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, because I remember seeing you there, and then you called. I'm like, oh, she probably wants to know what happened.
Right.
Thankfully, not a whole lot did, but
yeah.
I'm impressed, Onika, because I advise most people to stay as far away from me as possible. Otherwise, you'll be bombarded with endless trivia, and you'll wonder, why did I befriend this guy?
No, I remember those days when you first started, asking your questions, and how much you've grown since then. So, that to me is what's important, that community that I have. And, one of the things, and I think is I do, another thing that I do is sharing your gifts, expanding our minds. And it's a program where I bring people of color into the schools. And so that kids that look like me can see positive role models. I mean, yeah, I do bring athletes in. I do bring people who are in the movies. But to bring in people who, like Kalimba Edwards, who's a captain firefighter from North Minneapolis, and be able to bring people like that to the schools. And kids are like, oh, I didn't know we could be firefighters. Like, what? Because that's not what they see on TV. So that's one of the other things that I do as well, because I want our kids to understand that regardless of what other people's image of you is, I believe that you can be anything that you want to be, And so when I give a speech to a kid and they're like, I want to be an actor like you are. And I'm like, but they have to see it. They have to be able to touch it. A lot of these people are in the community. I had Coach Larry McKenzie come and speak to the kids, and they were just like, this dude is a Hall of Fame coach. He's won state. He's a speaker. He's a motivational author. And to be able to shake his hand and bring him, because they see him as this big person. And then when he sits there and it's just you and him, he's like a friend to you. Like, he makes you feel important. And that's what I want to do with the students that I work with at the schools.
You mentioned Larry McKenzie, and until he stepped down from coaching, it was always a highlight to go to Minneapolis North games. And I got to meet him, and I got to befriend some other members of his staff. And we still talk from time to time, but that was a highlight. And then getting to see Tyler Johnson go from, I don't want to say no name, but when he started there, North was not the contenders they were when Larry was there, to go from that. And when he won Super Bowl 54, I think it was.
Right, with
Tampa Bay when they beat Kansas City. It's like, well, I got to cover a Super Bowl champion.
Right, yeah.
I haven't personally benefited from that, but that's not why I do what I do, because I've covered him. I've covered both Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren, Page, and I don't get any kickbacks from it. But again, that's not why I do it. If I'm fortunate to be blessed with some kind of benefit, so be it. But I'm not doing this to prop myself up at the expense of others.
No, I think what you do is great, because it gives a lot. Yeah, you'll do some of the big name people, which is what they deserve, right? But you also give people an opportunity that people don't know, to sit down and have a conversation. I mean, people see me on my social media.
I'm going to say, are you saying people don't know you? You talked about the 200 friends you
have. I'm just saying, like, outside of that, to be able to have this platform to talk about all the stuff that I do. But then as you read, if you watch this, and then you're like, oh, I see why she made it for professional excellence and not just as an athlete. But you've given me a platform, so I thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk about all of it, because normally on my social media, it's one thing or another. It's not all together, right? So thank you.
All together in all sorts of different categories. So when you watch this at home, you might have to put together a flow chart to keep up with us, because we've been going all over the place. But that is the beauty of this podcast. There is no limit or rules as to what we can talk about. And going back to exposure, Onika, I know we keep going back to the high school part of it, because I am legitimately curious, because I when you started in high school, I wasn't born yet.
Thanks, bro.
No. and when you graduated, I was too young to really understand anything. And I don't mean this to date you, because I say that because there is this generation, and I've interviewed athletes who grew up around the same time you did with the same thing. So you talked about now we have so many ways to access athletes and figure out what they're up to, see what they're up to. But for you, what was the high school experience like? You started at Henry, then played at Washburn, and some friends of mine have mentioned in those days the city conferences were a hotbed, and you and I could probably be here for another hour or two talking about some of the demographic changes. A lot of those students now either go to the suburbs or private schools, which is fine. It's their journey, and I always say they're the author of their story. So you write whatever chapter you wish or write it however you see fit. But what do you remember being in the Minneapolis City Conference and just what it was like? Because I know back then it was quarters, 8-minute quarters, it was 2 classes, and
they didn't
you said not a whole lot of exposure. You were lucky to get a game on MTN. I think that was the extent of it. Or if somebody was diligent and brought those behemoth VHS camcorders to record games.
Well, for us, I mean, growing up in North Minneapolis, the big battles were, North and Henry, right? Derek Rubens, and you had the Prentice Perkins over at Henry. Larry McKenzie was at Henry at that time, coaching.
Yeah, he came in a little later.
Yeah, but you still had that group of kids that were coming up, and so, I mean, we didn't need social media. You knew on the calendar when North was playing Henry, or then when you got to the city conference, or when we played St. Paul Central with whoever won at the conference in Minneapolis, and it was just
the Twin Cities game.
Yeah. That's what it was.
Those were big. I think.
What? I mean, it was great entertainment. I mean, you would support your team, do or die, right? And it was an opportunity for all of us to come together. Grandmas would come out for that one particular game to watch the Twin Cities game or the conferences between those two, because those two were basically our bread and butter. Like, to be in that mix. I mean, to be honest, the North girls were always pretty decent. They would go far into the playoffs, and they would just, for some reason, they just didn't have the right to get over the hump. But the boys did, and the men did all the time. With Queen being their coach, right?
Yep, it was like 1980. I think they won a title, and we all know about their heyday in the 90s, both the men and women.
Right. But when for us, that was before, I was out of town, and when I came back, they were talking about T. Moore was the
Tamara.
Star. Right. And I'm like, who's this young lady? Just repping.
Oh, I'm sure you found out.
Oh, for sure. But I mean, I didn't get to see her in her prime because I was either at college or I was at California. But for us to be, we just wanted the girls' game to get over, and so that we could change our clothes and get and watch the men play. I mean, I'm being honest.
You wanted the girls' game to get over.
We did. You're like, all right, let's go.
We're talking about all this increasing equity for women in sports, and here you are saying, "Oh, we couldn't wait for the girls' game to be over."
We wanted to see Derek and those guys, and Bannon, I think, was one.
You know Lonnie Anderson, right?
Yep.
He does reffing, but he and I know each other, and actually we talk more about his archives than any of the games he's officiated, and one of them was the '88 Twin Cities game with Central and Minneapolis North. St. Thomas hosted it, and what you described, I saw the sold-out crowds. It was packed house, and I got to cover a few Twin Cities games when I started in my broadcast career, but the only time I think it really drew that level of anticipation was 2007, when Taylor Hill was just turning into a household name herself. And you had the St. Paul Central super team. Angel Herlat. And she just became the head coach of Tartan.
Did she really? Good for her. I didn't know that.
So she is the new head coach for Tartan girls basketball after an overseas career that it seemed like for her just kept going.
Right.
So she
is that the same when Kiara was?
Kiara was a year later.
Okay.
Yeah, and whatever happened to her anyway? I say that, I better explain it.
Yeah.
So Onika was talking about all the people she brought in. I think Kiara was one of those speakers for...
Yep.
I'm lost track as to how many different organizations you run. But again, she and I have a lot of mutual contacts. So Kiara was one of them, and I know she's getting back into coaching in AAU, and hopefully we'll see her back in a high school team because what she did at Cooper was phenomenal. Incredible.
Right.
To take a team that had nothing.
And bring them
no history, no pedigree at all. Where are we? I think I just went on all these different tangents. Yeah, so the Twin Cities games, you talked about what that was like, and yeah, for women's hoops, there wasn't a whole lot. And I think it will get better and better in terms of all the content and attention, but I do find it fascinating that your biggest memory was waiting for the girls' game to be done that you played in.
Yeah,
I'm guessing
right.
you played in a few of these
Right.
Twin Cities games,
Right.
and you couldn't wait to be done with that?
Right.
Because I know, like, that was a sense of pride for
me,
so
I
many
think,
athletes.
I wanted to go to North to play with Ebony and Queen Wilson and a couple Ebony, Daphne Walker, and Queen, and my mom made me go to Henry, and I think part of that was like watching them be almost successful to the point where they could win it. I was a little jealous, like they needed one more person. In my mind, that was...
They needed the Magic
me.
Johnson.
Yeah, they needed me.
They needed the point guard. Didn't you play wing too in college?
Yeah.
They needed the combo point guard.
Yeah. So in my mind, I always wanted, like when I would watch the girls when they did play Twin Cities, and I'm like, I could be a part of that. But I mean, I think the Lord had a road for me, and it wasn't meant to be. But I enjoyed. I mean, I think Mitch had sent me a clip from the paper, and it said
Mitch McDonald.
Yeah, Mitch McDonald, and he had sent me a clip. Washburn point guard Onika Craven scores 23 points against North. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
you see, and had you been at North,
that wouldn't happen.
You wouldn't have gotten that caption.
I was like, yeah. So that was where I wanted to be, but. Like I said, there's always a different road. I didn't want to go to Rainey. I actually went to St. Cloud State first. So, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to play there, and I left and went to Rainey, and it worked out. So I just have to say, like, sometimes in our generation, we don't want our kids to fail or be disappointed or heartache. But because of that heartache and pain that I went through at St. Cloud State, 30 years later, I'm a Hall of Famer. To wrap it all back up at Rainy River, the one school I never thought I would be at.
And to me, that's a good segue. What was the recruiting process like for you? Because I had no idea that you started at St. Cloud State and then went to Rainy River, so I'm learning more things about you. I remember you mentioning playing for Morris. I didn't realize there were 2 other stops, so if you don't mind, what was the process like for you, and how did you go from St. Cloud State to Rainy River to Morris?
Yeah, right. So as a freshman at Henry, everybody talked about going to St. Cloud State, and that was it. I mean, if you were either an athlete or just to go there, right? That was the big school that everybody went to. So I had it in my head to play. And at that time, and you talked about how all these kids are going out to the suburbs or private schools. And part of that is because a lot of our kids in the inner city was not getting recruited. You might be the top player at your team, but I mean, Coach Boone took his kids out of Minneapolis and took them to the suburbs because they weren't getting the looks that they needed, right? And so when I went to St. Cloud State in 1990, Queen Wilson was recruited to go there. I was not. I had a couple of junior colleges and that wanted me to come, and it just wasn't for me because I had it in my mind to go to St. Cloud State. And when I got there, I was like, I'll just walk on. And I remember doing the first 2 weeks, and then coach called me in, and I'm like, oh, she's about to give me a spot. And she said, you can't practice or anything with the team because you didn't get a high enough ACT. And at the time, I knew I had a 15 and I needed an 18. So my dreams was dashed because I had to sit out a whole year. And I remember saying, okay, Lord, if any school calls me, this is late November, right? If any school calls me, I don't care where it's at, to play basketball. And realistically, at that day and age, there wasn't social media. The Rainy River coach, Derek, Mr. Dieter, called and said, hey, I tried to recruit you last year, and I was wondering if you would think about coming up to Rainy and playing with us again now. And I said, let me finish out this year, get all my stuff in a row, and I'll come up there because you believed in me. Whatever talent you saw when you first saw me, you still had that love for me. I'll come up there. And that's how I ended up at Rainy. And then once I left, did the 2 years there, I transferred, graduated, and then went to the University of Minnesota Morris.
What do you recall from your college days? Even now, again, it's easier to access games, but to go to junior college, and then you played at a D3 school in Morris, so those athletes, I've often heard the line that they're doing it for the fun of it. They're not worried about pro offers. And again, at the time, there was no WNBA. So for a lot of athletes of your heyday, the college experience was it, unless they wanted to go overseas. But how do you think your experience playing for small colleges, playing the small college basketball, how do you think that helped shape you into the person you are now?
I think for me, it was just because I had such a love for it, the game. I could have played at a park every day and I wouldn't have cared, but it helped me get through school. Not like you said, like junior college, there's not a lot of scholarships for it, so you have to go to your education, which is one of the things that I wanted to do, and basketball was a way to do it because I have very bad time management, but I knew that we were going to be traveling on a bus. There was no planes. We were traveling up and down the roads of Minnesota going to game. And I'm like, well, I got to read this book before I get to Vermilion or wherever, right? And so for me, that was just an opportunity to help me with my school. It gave me an opportunity to be around people because I'm such a social butterfly. And so I loved the game.
I had no idea. Sorry to jump on you, but I had no idea you were a social butterfly as I see all your photos from that big boxing match at the Armory.
Yeah. That's part of what I do. And so for me, that's what it was. You have these kids that are now with the WNBA. These kids are really, that's what they're living for, to be able to play in front of their family or inside the state. Again, had no interest of going overseas to play. I wanted to be by my mom and my family. So I was like, if I get whatever I have to do to make sure I get my degree, to graduate, being one of the first in my family to do so, then I'll do it, right? And so basketball was my ticket in. And it wasn't because of the scholarship. It was because I enjoyed going to school. I loved school, even though it was pretty hard for me, but I loved it.
Fair enough. And what do you remember most fondly about your time as an athlete? Maybe you didn't get the headlines that your peers who went D1 did, or all of the pomp and circumstance that came with it, but clearly it benefited you in ways I don't think we could imagine had you never taken up the sport. So what do you remember most fondly as a college basketball athlete from your time there?
Even though we weren't like the big schools, people knew. Like at Rainy River, our women's team was really good those 2 years I was up there. And we would have the people in town come to our games, even if they didn't have a daughter on the team. And there's only a couple hundred seats in there, and it would be sold out for them to watch our game. And then it'd be funny, if my recollection is, they would kind of leave when the men would play. They had a lot of talented players, but they didn't play together, right? So it was a switch from the high school, right? Because there'd be not that many people for the girls' game, and then the boys' game would be packed.
Yeah, that's
right?
the classic, when people have talked about growing the game, that's the classic conundrum that people will show up for the men's games. It's changing a little bit now, but I get what you're saying. Because back then,
there wasn't it. But
there was. I don't want to say more misogyny, but I guess there was.
There was.
I don't need to sprinkle it or sugarcoat it.
There really was.
There were a lot of haters. There still are, but. But it's funny to hear that Rainy River, when you played, was the exception.
Yeah, so to go through town, we're like, oh, you play on a team is, and they knew a lot of us that were up there weren't from, if you're an African-American in International Falls, you probably weren't from there.
I didn't mean to laugh at like that, but I get what you're saying.
Right.
Even now, when I covered the NJCAA tournament this year that you attended, I was covering it, and seeing tomorrow's Mesabi Range team, that same thought entered my head, and not because of any prejudice. I do my best to try to be straight and treat everyone fairly and respectfully, but you're right. You go to these places. Well, I'm guessing it's the same. Yeah. It was the same at Morris too. You're not going to find a whole lot of people of color unless they're part of something, whether it's sports or some other.
Well, I think
at least that's my thought. But you were there. You have a better
at Rainy. Yes, it was as far as sports. If you've seen most of the people of color, they were up there for basketball. When I went to Morris, we had great load of kids that were there just because of the education, the liberal arts that you could get at Morris, right? So we had kids from Chicago and other that was just up there for school, which benefited them. I see a lot of the kids that graduated are doing great things. So, I mean, it's a top school. And so, I was the only African American on my women's team, and I think there might have been Chris Ransui, who played a couple years before. So there wasn't a lot of African Americans at Morris that played on any of the teams. Football was a different story, but as far as basketball, no. So they just wanted an education, and I think they got a good one. I think Morris was one of the top schools in the state.
How would you say the culture change, how do you think that influenced your worldview? And I hope you understand what I'm talking about here, because you grew up in Minneapolis and you talked about all your fond memories of going to the Twin Cities games, and then you go to these colleges that maybe don't have the same level of diversity as the neighborhood you grew up in. How do you think that shaped your perspective and, again, maybe played into all the things you're doing now?
I think this is how my mother, the reason I didn't go to North, and this she'll probably deny it, but this is what she told me. She asked me what school I wanted to go to, and I've told you before I wanted to go to North. And her reason, she said no, because there's too many black people there. She wanted the diversity that she knew I would get from Patrick Henry, that I wouldn't have gotten from North. Not that it was a bad school. She graduated from there. My aunts and everybody went to North. But she saw that the world was changing, and I would have to be able to connect between the white world and my community. And that helped me to be able to go up to Rainy River and not feel that I was like the only one. Like I wasn't a fish out of water, right? Because I had went to St. Cloud State, I had went to Henry. And so those opportunities to be able to be around different people, I can sit around. Right now I have friends that are Somali, Latino, African American, white. And so for me, that's where I grew up, right? Not in my community, because most of the people in my community were African American. But once I left those four corners of 19th and Thomas to be able to go up towards Henry, where it was predominantly white, and she saw that, she's like, if you're going to be successful in this world, you're going to have to be able to learn how to do both. And so for me, I mean, if you look at a picture with my friends, 70% of them are white or something else, right? But then I have my people where I could just African Americans and we're together. But I'm able to go out to California, and some of my friends out there that come here are Latino. And I think she saw that. And as a kid, I was just like, Mom, you're crazy. Why would that be the reason? But then, I don't know if you heard, there was a guy on the board for Minnesota, Morris, who said that he thought Morris was too diverse.
I remember hearing about that.
Like, what?
And I think this was my reaction, the Picard face palm. I even looked the part.
I was.
But yes, and
so that to me what do you mean? You want that.
What?
You want that diversity, and because your two friends who said they thought it was too, like, the world is changing, get used to it or get ran over.
The only constant is change, and I'm not even going to pretend to understand. I know everything about what's going on with all these different communities, but when I committed to covering sports, especially basketball, that's the sport where I have the most name recognition, and which always leads to me cringing when a player goes, "Hey, I watch all your games on YouTube." I'm like, oh, that's right, people watch. But I understood, especially growing up in St. Paul and covering games all over, you're going to meet people who don't look like you, and for me, I just try not to make a big deal out of it, if you know what I'm saying. It's like, no, they have a story. They're there for a reason. And
right. I don't just like...
I'm not going to accuse a team or a community of being too diverse.
I could get into a lot. But so that kind of...
You and I need a whole nother podcast, I think, because I know we only have so much time here. But there were a few more things I wanted to touch on. You and I, it feels like we just scratched the surface because we've gone in so many different directions here, but what is your philosophy to life, to sports? Because I've seen you and I, of course, I would see you all the time at Lynx games, and your role was a little different from mine, but you were happy, you've gotten some great memories out of it, and you kind of represent that bridge where you would sit courtside and cheer the Lynx on and all the other teams, but when you needed to, you would join us in the locker room and do whatever duties were needed, whether it was yourself or if Charles Hallman had something, because I know the two of you would pair up frequently, but then again, with over 200 friends on your speed dial, like you can pair with almost anybody. So you've gotten to interview the likes of Becky Hammon, Sue Bird. You've been courtside and ringside to a lot of big events. What is your philosophy, your attitude? Because you get to experience a lot, and I know you're always happy to share all of these memories you get to play a part in making.
For me, it's just, I don't want to be pigeonholed. I don't want somebody to tell me what I can't do, right? I think the idea is that there's so much that's out there, and why can't I be a part of it, right? I never thought I would be ringside at a boxing match. And like you said, when I first started, my friend had courtside seats, and then I got asked by Tony Gear and by Charles to help him with photography, and so I actually spoke with, Coach Reeb, and like, is that going to be a problem to be able to go from being a fan and then go back into the locker room? And I think, the conversation is, as long as you're professional when you come in there and you take that fan thing off. But I was able to do Facebook Live with the players and got to know them. And so when they had that 25th anniversary, a couple weeks ago, we hadn't seen players in years, and they'd see me like, hey, I talked to Maya and got to talk with her and have a great time. But for me, it's just, I'll do anything. Last year, I think I went to the U.S. Open for golf, got tickets for that. I think there's so much opportunity.
Was it that, or there was some other event?
The 3M Open.
No, I was going to say where someone would asked if you were supposed to be there, like you had a credential, and people were wondering, like, is she supposed to be here? Kind of going back to the whole too diverse thing. I don't know if that was the golf event or if it was something else.
It happens all the time. It does. It's just like, and if you ever get a chance to talk to Charles, this is a true story. We went to a Wild game, and we were in the locker room, and Charles and I were in the middle. And there were all these other media, they were all white around us. And they had a young guy passing out stats from the game. And he literally walked past Charles and I. Now, the only way you can be in there is to be a player or a media person at that moment or work for the team.
Yeah, right.
And they walked past Charles and I, and he went to the next 2 or 3 people. And so we're like, excuse me, we want some stats. And he goes, oh, excuse me, I didn't see you. The ignorant statement of that was just like, just say you didn't think we were supposed to be there, right? And so I want to be at those events. If it's golf, I'm going to be there because I need the exposure to be able to say that we can be at anything, if it's hockey, tennis, golf, whatever, right? I've photographed, President Obama and Bill Clinton, and for me as a African-American media person who did a lot, I always have to make sure that my credentials is seen. Oh, you were talking about the football game. Yeah.
Okay.
Or the Final Four. Yeah. So
there was some event. I didn't know if it was golf, but
no, it was basketball. They were doing something.
The hockey story in itself. Like, wait a minute. And of course, I've seen you and Charles. So I would be like, hey,
Charles is 6'6", 6'4", what?
Well, and even it's not just the physical,
but I'm just saying,
the physicality of it. It's the fact that the two of you. I've seen you at games forever.
Right.
So
I was blown, but it was at a football, and so
what the heck?
So I'm always mindful to have my credential out because people don't think I need that. Why are you back here? I could see white people go in and out, 12-year-olds with their dad's badge, and they don't say anything, right? And so at this particular game, they had it at the Metrodome or U.S. Bank. And all these people were walking through to go out to the court. And the security person saw me and was like, grabbed my credential, flipped over. What are you doing? I'm just double checking that it's a real badge, So I was furious. I walked through, and then a few minutes later, a bunch of white people came in, nothing. And another black guy, I think it was Mitch, that came through. And she went to him and flipped it over, then did the same thing. It's the same one that everybody else that just walked in. So being a woman is one, being a person of color is also, because it's not very many of us here. So we always have to be able to be mindful and be on our toes when it comes to stuff like that, because we can't just do anything, because they are quick to ask us why you're here or how you got it. And, with us working at a smaller paper, we had to be able to show that we know what we're doing and we are professional.
After we're done, I'll text you, because there's a former player, but a guest I interviewed on my podcast a couple of years ago who was starting her own Black Rosie Media. I don't know if you've heard about that yet. Remind me to connect the two of you, because she's trying to create a space for fellow women of color in the media world. And like I said, I know whatever my feelings are toward you or Charles or any particular media member, be like, hey, no, wait a minute. I've seen them at games forever.
Right.
Like, you know, if
there.
they're here, they're here, they're there for a reason. They're not just doing it. And
right. And
I know Charles, he doesn't go to events just for
social
free
media.
tickets. No, he's there
working.
And
we both just got an award.
You have your purpose, and you found a place that, like you said, you get to enjoy everything. So.
And I mean, it's funny
what have you done, Onika? You told me the story. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because people, they're like, how did you get here? Why are you here? You're not this. But last year, both Charles and I got an award for media, right? So
yeah, I know Charles was.
But he got a lot more. But I mean,
I think it was the writer. Was it the basketball writers?
Yep, Hall of Fame, and then another one too. So his is coming later in life, because people. I remember a story he said when he was at Michigan State, and they asked him what he wanted to be, and he said a journalist, and his professor was like, "No, you'll never be that, because of the color of your skin."
That aged well,
right? And he's like, "Really?" But it's now because we're at a smaller paper, it's taking people to recognize. But he's still getting his flowers now, and that's the same guy he is now. He was, I'm pretty sure he was at Michigan State. So we just do our job, go in and come out, and let people see our success. We don't really have to say it.
And something I've learned too in my experience is that there's a lot of patience involved. I tell folks I've been broadcasting for 17 years. I know I'm not where I want to be in terms of the level of broadcasting, but there's a lot of patience involved. It took you 30 years after you graduated to get into the Rainy River Hall of Fame?
Right, 30 years.
It took Charles a little longer than that.
Yeah.
Just got to be patient.
And it's just, because we do it not so much for the awards, because I don't think we ever got into it, be like, oh, I'm going to do this so I can get
If that's your purpose, I don't think you're doing it.
Right.
Like, I got into it because I like to talk, so I figured might as well do something useful. But no, I love sharing stories, whether it's calling a game or doing this.
Right.
That's what I got.
I think
that's what I get out of it.
I think for me, it's being able to expose our younger children that if they see me at the games or out doing all this, that if I can do it, it's always great. That if she can do it, I can do it too. And that's what I get when I hear a young kid tell me, when I grow older, this is what I want to do. Or when they see me and they'll say, man, I remember when you told me I could do this, and now I'm doing it. And I think for me, that's the greatest award that I could that would be my legacy right now, to be able to give back to my community.
And if nothing else, Onika, if you run into any more trouble, myself and I think a few of your other friends we share on speed dial, if you run into any more trouble, just call us up and we'll vouch for you as a media member. We're like, oh yeah, she means business. She's a little different, everyone's a little different. They bring something different when they put on the credential and do the interviews and ask the questions. But yeah, I don't know why I'm still stuck on that, because I would not for a second ever even think that you don't belong there.
It's and I say, to you it's a surprise, but to us, I think even Charles has written a couple articles about being at certain places and they overlook him, and he's like, this is my beat.
Not just the two of you. Again, fellow media members have run into that. Person I talked about kind of ran into that with a former employer of hers following a little skirmish about access. It's a long story, but I could understand that, maybe that sentiment, or like, okay, this isn't the first time you've dealt with this. It doesn't make it any less annoying.
Right.
No, and again, but I've known you since we've met as, okay, you're there, and if you're in the locker room, you have a reason to be there, and you will do everything you can to respect the position and privilege that you've been given. And
absolutely. And
hey, got you some. So when Becky Hammon won her first title, or I know when you went back, you shared those moments with a point of pride as well.
Yeah.
There's a couple more things I wanted to ask you, Onika, as we get close to this, finishing that is, but throughout your playing career, what would you say was the most embarrassing moment and the most exciting moment?
The most embarrassing...
Besides meeting me.
Yeah, no. I was at Morris in I did a play. I was going down for a ball, and I swear that the other player kicked me like in my chest or somewhere in my face. And so I coach called me out, and she's like, "What happened there?" I'm like, "Man, that girl kicked me." And she's like, "She did?" Because I think I got up and pushed her, right? And then in taping the next day, she had it on that particular play. That girl's foot was nowhere near my, I don't know what, if we just bumped shoulders or whatever, but and she played it over. I was like, "Coach, I get it. The girl didn't kick me," but I was a little embarrassed about that. But the most exciting part is to be able to finally play with Daphne Walker, because she had played at North, and to play with her at Rainy River, and the success that we had up there. And I just always thought if we could have been able to put that same magic down here in the cities, it would have been magical. But for me, that was it, to be able to play with. And that, for me, growing up and watching Daphne at Franklin and then going to North. So that's when I found out she was going there, it was perfect, and we hit it off. And still, I called her yesterday actually to see if she wanted to go to the Lynx game, but she was getting ready to go to work. So those friendships with the players that I played with are still part of who we are, because we do 4, 5, 6 months together, and these are our families, while we're together wherever we are. And to leave that and still have that bond, it's really special. And you get that with people you work with, but as an athlete, you'll be able to have friends with these guys forever.
And as crazy as this might sound, considering everything we've talked about in this last hour, what would you say is the most unusual thing about yourself that people wouldn't know if they met you for the first time? And this could be anything, fun fact, hobby, interest, but something that when people meet you and you're like, "Oh, by the way," like, what?
I say that I'm a social butterfly, but if I were to just go into a spot with a bunch of people, I'm really quiet. I don't really go out and say, "Hey, my name is Onika Craven, nice to meet you." I'll let you come to me, and I'm fine with that if you don't. But people are like, "But you know so many people," and I was like, it's just years of seeing the same people over and over again. But because I'm so bubbly at times, it's just like I'm still an only child, and I can admire the stuff that's going on, and I can sit in a corner and sit there for an hour and not say anything to nobody and be perfectly fine with that. And people are like, just seeing who I am and all the things that I do, that seems like an oxymoron. But I tell people that all the time, I'm very to myself.
I have a theory behind that.
What you got?
I think you're quiet and reserved to see if anyone will pass you over, like what happened in that hockey game. It's like, all right, if they skip past me, then I know they're not over. Legit. If they come up and say hi, then I tease, of course. I don't mean to diminish the slights you've had. And like I said, we almost would need a whole another episode maybe to go over that. And I guess, I would leave with this, because we've talked about how you want to be there and you just want to play a part. You want to be an embodiment that fellow Black women and anybody can do what you're doing and belong there. So for those who maybe are considering a career in media or looking at their own nonprofit, doing all of the engagements that you've taken up, what advice would you have to anyone watching or listening who's thinking about starting that path to a media career or finding a way to provide a service and a benefit to the community? What advice would you give to them?
First is, whatever it is that you have a desire to do, go and do it. I think a lot of people I think God gives each of us a gift. And what ends up happening is, because it doesn't happen right away, people give up, right? And go out there and find what you're passionate about. I work at a school my entire life, right? But it's what I do after work. And people are like, "You should be a teacher." That's not the passion that I have. I have a passion and love for the kids that I work with, but to be an educator is not where I fit in. But I can have that same impact with those children. But I think if you have an impact or you want to make an impact with people, is find something that you enjoy doing and go after it. You're not going to know everything. When I wrote a film, I didn't go to film school to write, but I had a passion and a desire to give a story. And I just started writing. And then people came to me and like, "Oh, you should do it this way," and helped me to get where I want. We didn't go to business school to start Onika's Angels. We had no idea what we were doing. I mean, I tell a funny story. Somebody had sent us a check. We had just got our name. It wasn't, we didn't do any publishing. We didn't do anything. We didn't register it. It was just, we were going to buy Onika's Angels. And somebody had saw us and they sent us a check for $1,000. And I literally went to the bank and I was like, I want to deposit this check. And they're like, you need a business account. How do I do that? Right? And so just going in, and don't worry about failing. Don't worry about how long it takes you. I think if you have something, a story that you want to tell, just do it, and the other pieces will come together. There will be people around you that will know. Like when I started in photography, it was Sophie who brought me in. Like, hey, come on over. Let me tell you how to do this. You don't be in the back because you have all these men in front of you. Like, no, you belong here too. And she was the first one that pulled me to the front and was like, go ahead, take your picture, right? And so I learned from her. And so that's how I was able to do stuff. And then Tony saw what I was doing, and he allowed me to work with him. And then eventually went to Charles. And so I think that's it. Love what you do, and don't quit. Don't. If I'm looking in the camera, do not quit.
It sounds like too, because I ask this of my guests from time to time. It sounds like that's would be a version or some variant of it if you met a younger version of yourself. What you just said, I have a feeling you would tell that person.
Mm-hmm. Don't quit. I mean, like I said, when I went to St. Cloud State and wasn't able to play basketball for whatever reason, I could have got injured, or the team coach didn't want me, or whatever. But I still had a thing in my head that I was still good enough to play somewhere. I just needed somebody to believe in me. I believed in myself, but I needed the opportunity. There's times when people will come to me now and say, hey, can you do this? And I have no idea what it's going to turn out to be, but I don't let fear stop me. I mean, when you asked me about doing a podcast, I was a little nervous and hesitant, but I said yes, because I knew, I'm like, well, I know Mike, he's going to make me feel comfortable. He's not going to put me in a situation that is not going to be beneficial for the both of us. I get to tell my story, right? I know my history. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And now I'm like, all right, this is something that I can do. So that's it.
And my takeaway from this is I should have scheduled more time.
Maybe,
you know what, we'll do a return visit. But like I said, I like to highlight people, and I felt a Hall of Fame induction would be a good way. Absolutely. Because, again, I know I dated you before. My apologies for that. No, age is just a number. Let's be real. Because I trust me, I've got a few gray hairs. If I grow this out, you'll see it too. So I'm not getting any younger. But there's so many stories, especially from your era. And Tony, of course, I think it's been 10 years since he passed. Right. But Charles, we mentioned him before, and all these other people, Mitch and Kwame, they came from an era where there wasn't as much documentation. And with all the work that you've done, which is being recognized by Rainy River, maybe Morris down the road, who knows what this accomplishment, what this honor could do for your legacy, your story. But I figure if you made one school's Hall of Fame, there's got to be a pretty good reason for it. And I think you gave us more than one. Right. And that's why I wanted to do it. Right. Especially, again, without all this media coverage we were talking about before. You had to be lucky. I think you had to hope somebody was out there and willing to tape all these games. And if the VHS tapes still work, now everything is on Huddle or it's on phone. So there's this era of athletes like yourself from the past that I don't think we know a whole lot about. And I feel this podcast plays a small part in filling in those gaps to find you and I. How much do we even talk about your basketball? It felt like we did, and then it would jump into so many other categories.
I think because...
But we've known each other for so long.
Right. And I think because, you've known me. You didn't get the chance to see me during when I played. And I wasn't one of the big players, as I got older. But what you see me as is all the other stuff that I do. And so that ties into me being a Hall of Famer for professional excellence. And I was able to say, this is the reason why. When people say, I'm like, oh, that makes sense, right? I think sports has an opportunity for you to be able to get along with people. It gives you time management. It builds so much confidence in yourself. And I need all of those accolades that I got, not just accolades, but all the things that I learned in basketball as a team, I can do now if I'm in the individual. Like when you're on a team, you need to be on time, you need to play as a team, you need to work together. And those benefits that you have on the court can go into a business, or it can go into your daily life. If people are counting on you to do a certain thing on the court, that's what they might have me do when I'm at a school or when I'm running my business, you know? So they tie in with each other, not so much they tie in together. The success that you have on the court, you can do outside, you know? And so I think that's why we're talking so much about all the other things. But trust me, it's based in me being an athlete.
And you know what? Maybe one of your teammates, Daphne, you mentioned before, maybe some older teammates of yours will see this, and maybe we can get them on too and just highlight just how talented of an athlete you were. If people were comparing you to Magic Johnson back in the day, you've had to have had some skills.
I love that, but yeah.
But Onika, this was a treat and an honor, and I'm always grateful to share stories with my guests whenever, wherever it may be. And I'm glad we got to tell a part of your story. I have a feeling there's a whole lot more we could learn from you. And maybe we do it in a future episode, or maybe someone else comes in. Maybe you can get Charles to do a one-on-one with you.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Charles or Mitch. It's like, you've got their number, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. But it's great to see you have so many different pathways and have a part in so many different groups of people where you get to experience a lot. And I remember saying this when you would go to film premieres and do all this other stuff. I said, I envy what you do, not because I'm jealous or it's like, why don't I get it? But you know, you're someone that gets after it. And like you said, you're not worried about how it might turn out or how silly it might look. You're going in there with the understanding that whatever happens, you're going to come out of it that much smarter.
Right. No, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to be able to tell, you know, like you said, a part of my story. I've been on this planet for 51 years, and so there's a lot that I've been able to do, and I just look forward to the next, you know, century or whatever, however long that I got. But I always think, if today is going to be my last day on this earth, what did I do to make somebody else better, right? And so I think for me, that's my relationship with God is what I feel that He gave His life for me, and now it's my turn to give my life to somebody else.
Well, once again, thanks, Onika, and I can't wait to hear the future successes and achievements that will come your way, whatever it looks like. I know you stay active, and I'm touched. I guess I'll say I'm touched that I'm one of your speed dial people.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
If I get another call from you, it's like, all right, she wants an explanation.
Yeah, no, you know, if you ever need anything, you know, my phone, same number. You know what I mean? But I think that's that people, if people say, well, what is it about Onika? And I want to give you, if it's just me and you, I want to make sure you feel as important as if I was talking to a CEO. Right? I mean, not to drop, but I text Dan from, you know, he was the GM for Seattle.
Dan Hughes.
Yeah.
Oh, I interviewed Dan a few times.
Right?
No,
so Dan's a good friend of mine. I stayed at his house. I know his wife. And being at the game last night, I took a picture of the Seattle, and I was like, it's not the same without you and Sue. And he immediately texted me back, and my dad's looking over like, does I say GM? You know what I mean? Like, but I would treat him the same way that I would see, or if I'm in a building, or a custodian, because I want them people to know that they are important regardless of what your job is. And I think people see that's genuine. I don't know what these people do outside of their life. I might see them on the way up, but if you treat people a certain way, you're going to see those same people going down, right? So I don't care who you are. Like, what? Like, if you have my undivided attention and we're together, then you have my undivided attention, and I don't care what you do.
What's the line? I think it was from Annie, Daddy Warbucks. You don't have to be nice to anyone on the way up if you're never coming back down.
We're coming down.
I was going to say, side note, you will. Everyone will either come back down or pursue another path.
Right.
But I get it. No, I have a couple of former WNBA players I'm pen pals with, and we text, and we'll be like, oh, how's it going?
Yeah.
And likewise, even with my experience, the Greenways come to mind, for example, or I covered all three of the Vassalero kids who were sports, and I would catch up with the parents, and oftentimes we would talk about anything outside of what they were famous for.
Right.
Like you said, it's a part of them, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
You're more than just numbers. So,
Right.
well, I'm glad to see that you've kept up those friendships, and who knows where it will lead. Well, look what it's done for you with all the different. It got you on the Star Tribune once. Who knows? It might get you on the Strib or maybe Sports Center when the Lynx, if and when they go back into the finals,
Right,
have
right.
another one. But once again, thanks, Onika, and best of luck as you continue your work with Onika's Angels. And I forget what other group you mentioned, where you bring in people.
Oh yeah, sharing your gifts, expanding our minds.
You're going to have to send me, you did, but next time send me like a note card or a printout. Because, no, and it's not because I don't care, but when I read your bio, like, yeah, you do so much of everything that I can't remember every little detail, because one day you're doing Onika's Angels, tomorrow you could be CEO of something. I have no idea. And it wouldn't surprise me.
Right. Well, no, I thank you. I appreciate that. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, like you said, it's onikasangels.org. You can email us at onikasangels@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to get back with you. Or all my social media. Under Facebook, it's Onika Nicole Craven. Under Twitter and Instagram, it's Purple612Reign, REIGN.
All right. Well, hopefully this gets a few more contacts coming your way. Onika Craven of Onika's Angels and Hall of Fame member at Rainy River Community College. Just one of the many things that make Onika a generous, kind character. And if you have a story you'd like to share, we're happy to do so. Just contact us on social media at @TheMikePeden. If you've got a story, we want to share it. So until next time, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
If you'd like to support TSB television programming, sponsor us at patreon.com/TSB television, PayPal @TSB television, or Cash App @TSB television. Thank you for listening to Mic'd Up Sports.